Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to my design class live. Welcome to this video about text in Adobe Photoshop. We're going to be learning all sorts of cool things in this live stream. Things such as how to use the type tool, how to create text, how to modify your text using leading, kerning, and tracking. We're also going to be covering some other cool effects such as how to warp your text without actually having to convert your text into a smart object. Just after this, I'm going to be live on my film class as well. So if you feel like learning something about Adobe After Effects today, then that is possible. I'm going to be talking all about expressions on that channel today. Just the basic expressions, just loop in, loop out, and some wiggle expressions. So if you feel like tuning into that, then do feel free to come to my film class just after this. It should be good fun over there too. On another note, if you need extra help after any of these live streams, by the way, in the video description, I've included the user guide for Adobe Photoshop. So if you have any extra questions or you're slightly confused about a topic, or maybe I didn't get the chance to answer your question in the live stream, then you should be able to access the user guide, which will be in the video description. And the user guide for Photoshop, and indeed any of the Adobe applications, is really, really good. It contains everything you need to know. It's got like GIFs, so it actually shows you how things work. So yeah, I'd really highly recommend you going there in case you do have a burning question that you might have that I can't answer. And cool, just before we start as well, from this week onwards, I'm going to be introducing a newsletter to the channel. So you can stay nice and up to date as to what's actually going to be appearing in the next live stream. So if you want to stay ahead and actually get your questions ready, maybe cover some of the content in advance, and if you have any problems, come to the live stream and we can try and look through it together, then that might be a great way for you to stay up to date on what's coming up. And I'll also be sharing some extra tips and other insights in that newsletter, so feel free to sign up to that. There's also going to be a link in this video description for that in case you're interested in that too. So yeah, apart from that, let's get started and let's actually get into Adobe Photoshop and try and create some cool text. So to start with, what we're going to do is just learn how to actually find and create text itself. So the easiest way to do this is to use the type tool in Adobe Photoshop. So what we can do for that, we got a question which says, do you offer one-on-one classes? Unfortunately, I don't offer one-on-one classes at the moment. If it is something people are interested in, then possibly at some stage we could. But I try to answer as many questions in these live streams, so hopefully that's a bit more of a one-on-one opportunity. So yeah, not at the moment, but maybe in the future. Okay, so let's find the type tool in Photoshop. So to start with, it's going to be easiest to find it either on the left-hand toolbar here, where you can find the horizontal type tool. Just by holding it, you can also find the vertical type tool. If you want to create text, that's vertical. The other way of actually getting to the tool is just by pressing the letter T on your keyboard. And that will automatically bring up the type tool, whether you're on Windows or Mac. Your cursor is going to change this text icon, which is going to allow you to add text to your document. So the easiest way to do this, you can either press once, in which case you're going to create just some text like a heading, or, so for example, I'm just going to change the color of this so we can actually see our text, just like that. So it's going to create just 2 or 3 words, and that will allow you to, for example, just type in a heading, just like that. If you want to commit to the change, you can either press on the tick here, just at the top, or you can decide to cancel that and not commit to it just by pressing cancel here. The other way you can create text is just by holding and dragging, and this allows you to create more of a traditional paragraph style with an actual customizable box around the outside, so you can scale the box and actually confine your text within a certain area. I'm just going to reduce the size of that just so you can see it as well. And there you are. So that way you can actually create a body of text. And being able to manipulate the box in which the text is confined. So to start off, we'll just create a simple title for our text. As you can see at the moment, it's only setting my text color to white, and that's because In a previous project, I must have used the color white for my text object, so it's always going to remember whatever text parameters you used from your previous project. So just to change the color at the top here, where there's this white box, you can press on that and you can find the color picker. And that's going to allow you to select any color and you can just press OK to confirm that. I'm just going to press on the tick because that way I've committed the change and applied the text to my document. Any future text that I now create is also going to automatically use black as a color. So that's just nice and handy. So to start off with, there's some basic things that we always want to change with our text. Those being normally the font, the size of our text, and also the weight of our text. Weight being almost the width of each character, so we can determine whether we want a normal, a regular, maybe a thin looking text or a bold text or something. So the easiest way to customize this is just to make sure you have the selected. So if you're on the text tool, you can just double click on the text. If you're not on the text tool, if you're on the move or the selection tool, you can also double click. Another way to select your text is going to the layer itself and double clicking on the icon. So those are all great ways to select all of your text. So at the top here, we can actually change those three parameters right here. So the first option is your font. So you can select on that and see all of the fonts that you have downloaded on your computer. At the top, you can actually customize which or criteria the fonts. So if you want to, for example, see all the Adobe fonts you have in stock installed on your computer, which for me is all of these fonts at the moment, then I can filter it just to see my Adobe fonts. To get Adobe fonts, you do need a Creative Cloud subscription, so these won't be available if you don't have that. You can also add fonts to your favorites, so if you have fonts that you use regularly, so Greycliff is the font that I use for this channel. So you can just put a star next to any font that you like here, and that'll automatically add that to your favorites, so you don't have to go scrolling through all your fonts to find the one that you need. If you want to get extra fonts from Adobe, if you have that license, then you can press on here and it's automatically going to take you to the Adobe font site. So I'm just going to stick to Greycliff, which is the font that I like to use. Next, you can change the font width, which is in this box here. So at the moment, I have regular set, but as you can see, this font comes with a whole load of different text widths, which is pretty cool. So for example, I have the regular, which is great for normally bodies of text, like paragraphs, for example. You can have a thinner font if you're trying to create a title, which is maybe using quite a thin font, or you have that kind of sleek look. Or you can choose heavier options such as bold, which is the automatic bold option that you have normally if you're using something like Microsoft Office. Or you have the heavy option, which is obviously the most width that you can apply to your font. So for example, for a heading, that might be a great option if you really want your font to stand out. The next option is the size of your font. So either you can select from some custom sizes some kind of standard sizes that we normally use, or you can change the size yourself just by typing in a different size, or you can use the slider to the left, which if you hold and drag and go right, you can make the font bigger. If you can hold and drag go left, you'll make it smaller. So those are kind of the three basic parameters that we normally want to change. The next parameters that we have, let me go back to this first one actually to start off with. So a minute ago when I was saying you could create horizontal and vertical text. At the moment we have horizontal text. The text goes from left to right on our screen, which is kind of standard. If we want to go from up to down, you can press on this icon here and you can automatically change your text to go in that direction. So for example, now it goes from top to bottom, just like this. So if you accidentally didn't select the correct tool or you change your mind and you want to change text and the orientation of it, that's a quick way to be able to actually adjust that. So if we just stick to horizontal text for now. So I'm going to name this text heading 1. This is going to be our heading. We're just going to try and create a sample document with a few headings and a few paragraphs, all well proportioned using what's called the golden ratio. I'll be talking about that in a minute. And then we're going to try and format this document nice so it looks pretty cool. So the next few options that we have, text alignment, some basic text alignment options. So obviously if we want it left aligned, center aligned, or right aligned. Normally, obviously you go for left aligned unless it's, for example, a heading. If you move it and you hold try and drag it to the center of your screen, you can see that these guides are appearing. If you can't see any of those, just press Command and H or Control and H if you're on Windows, and those should quickly appear. If you want to free transform the text, this is another cool thing about text objects in Adobe Photoshop. If you press Command and T, which allows you to actually transform and manipulate the text, rotate it, etc. If you try and scale your text and apply and commit to that choice, the next time that you actually try and select the text using the type tool, the font size is automatically going to adapt. So you don't actually lose any sharpness. It's not a pixelated or rasterized layer. So if you try and scale your text, it's always going to stay sharp. So that's pretty cool as well. This other option here is slightly more advanced. This has got to do with anti-aliasing. So for example, if I zoom in, it has all to do with the pixelation of the edges around your text. It's not really important if you're only just starting out, but it's good to be aware that this does happen in Photoshop. So as you can see at the moment, around the edge of our text, we have this kind of pixelated, it's pixelated. And this is because part of it is not sharp and it's going across several pixels in order to create that curve. Now, sometimes you might want to change this setting to see whether you want it more or less pixelated around here. So if you don't apply any anti-aliasing, as you can see, it's going to be very rough and very sharp. And this is not going to look great. If we zoom out of our document, you can see it's quite rough and it doesn't look quite great. So there is 4 different options that you can apply for anti-aliasing to make sure that it does transition well with any other layer that you have. Sharp is going to be the sharpest and it's going to look the cleanest. But you have all of these other options as well if you want to make it look less sharp or you want it to blend slightly better into your background. So for example, smooth is going to be the smoothest one that you can use. As you can see, it's really going to blend in quite nicely. The other options, strong is going to be a bit of a heavier. It's quite hard to describe some of these things because you kind of just have to see it. But you could see that there was a slight change with the smooth. And it looks slightly heavier, so you don't have quite as nice a blend between the 2 layers. And then sharp, crisp is basically a slightly less sharp version of sharp. But sharp is going to make it look really sharp when you can see the difference. So this is heavy. You can see that there's slightly more weight behind the text before it actually transitions. And then sharp is kind of just a nice clean look. So I normally just keep it on sharp unless there's something really specific that I'm looking at. But that'll just allow your text to fit nicely into your document. Okay, so I mentioned that we can use something called the golden ratio in order to change the sizes of our text and make the heading fit in well with our body text. So for example, if I have, let me create a paragraph. So for example, Photoshop's always going to fill in, this text for us with just some standard lorem ipsum. If I set this to regular, because it's going to be our text body, let me set this to 60. So that's going to be roughly the size of our paragraph. I'm just going to copy it a few times just so we have a bit more text to work with, just so it's a bit more apparent. Maybe like so. And I'm just going to press the tick here. So as you can see, normally what we have is we have a heading. I'll just quickly align to the side here. Like so. And it's probably text aligned to the left. There we are. Perfect. So normally what we do is we try, one of the easiest things to get into is that you actually try and eyeball the size of your text to try and see what works well and whether it looks proportionate to each other. Because you want your designs to be harmonious and you want to be able to have a nice proportionate, nice proportioning between all of the text so that it's easy to look at, easy to read, and very eligible. So the easiest way to do this is to apply a rule which is called the golden ratio, which is actually used a lot within design and as well in mathematics, etc. And this golden ratio basically says that if you multiply or divide anything by the number 1.618, it's always going to look proportionate. So you can apply this in certain places within design in order to make this the case. So for example, if we have our text here and we've set the font size to 60, the best next size for our font, if we wanted to make something larger, would be 60 multiplied by 1.68. So for example, if I'm trying to create a heading 2, which is a slightly smaller heading, if I set the size to 60, like so, it's now the same size as our paragraph text. If I wanted to make it larger, what I could do is I could go to the font size, and you can actually do mathematical equations within this box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply it. So I'm going to use the little star icon, and I'm going to multiply it by 1.618. And that's the golden ratio. So if I now press enter, Photoshop's going to work that out for us. And now we automatically have the correct size for our second heading. And this size automatically looks well aligned and in good proportion to our paragraph text. The same applies if we want to go even larger. So for example, if I duplicate this layer just by holding Option or Alt on my keyboard, I can just drag it out like this. And let's call that heading 1. So that's going to be slightly larger than heading 2. And I'm now going to take this new number, which is 60 multiplied by 1.68, and multiply that by 1.68 to get our heading 1. 1.618. And now we have our heading 2. And again, this looks very well in proportion to all of our other text. And this you can apply to a lot of things within design, within software like Photoshop and even After Effects or something. And it's going to give you a really well balanced and well proportionate layout and design for your text. So that is something to be aware of, and hopefully you can implement that within your own designs in order to make sure that it all feels well balanced and well proportionate. So moving on for some other cool things that we can do with text, I'm going to cover some of the other things that we have on this panel here. So we've covered whether we want vertical or horizontal text, the font, the weight, the size, and how we can apply the golden ratio to that, anti-aliasing, and then we have our text align. We've already had a look at the color, but this is how you select color for text. You can also change the color of a specific character. Just make sure you select the character and then change the color if you want to do that. And then finally, we also have this last option, which is warp text. So this is a pretty cool feature, which basically ensures that you don't have to use free transform and the transform property warp on your layer. So normally what you might do is you might convert this to a smart object, like so. And then you might go to edit and free transform and then warp. But this is actually a destructive process. So once you warp this layer and press tick, it's not actually, the layer itself is destroyed. Obviously we put it in a smart object, so we can actually always go back and edit our text in the smart object. But what you'll notice is that the layer inevitably actually pixelates at the edges and it's no longer sharp. So the way to avoid this with text objects is that you can actually use warp. So if you just select the text and then go to this last option up here, you actually get some default warp text options that you can apply to your text. So at the moment we've got nothing selected, but for example, I could choose from any of these shapes below. So if I just want a standard arc, it's automatically going to warp our text into an arc. And we can choose how much we want to apply, whether we want it to be vertical or horizontal, and how much distortion we want at either end. And as you can see, you can create some really cool text shapes just by doing this. And the benefit of this is you can always go back and just choose none if you don't want it applied, or you can change it. And it's also not going to impact the sharpness of our text, which is great. So you can also choose arch, for example, or you could go with a fish shape. You can make all sorts of weird and wacky text shapes, which obviously you can't really read, but I mean, they'll look cool. Squeeze, for example. So you can see all of these nice effects that you can apply to warp text. And a lot of people don't actually know that that feature is there. So just do be aware that you have the ability to warp your text here without actually having to rasterize your layer and destroy it. So if that's something you want to apply, go ahead and try that. Cool. So now we're going to go into some of the more specific things that you can change about text, especially leading, kerning, and tracking. One other thing I'll quickly mention, because I have had a few questions on this channel about this, is how you actually add emojis to text. Because sometimes it's not as simple as just copying and pasting an emoji into text, especially because a lot of fonts don't actually support emojis or have glyphs, especially for emojis or characters. So if, for example, I want to add an emoji to this text, let me just get rid of this. Let's say I want to add just a simple smiley emoji. Well, I can't type it because it's not on my keyboard. And I can't copy and paste one in from the web, so how do I get one? Well, the easiest way to do this is just to create a small bit of text and then go to the font selection and then type in emoji. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring up all of the emoji fonts that you have on your computer. So you can install other emoji fonts if you don't have the emoji fonts that I have. I have the Apple package, and I think the Sergio here, I think that is the Windows package. So obviously if you're Windows, you might not have the Apple package available to you, but you can download those fonts from the web if you did need to. So if I select the Apple emoji package, you'll see on the right that the glyphs panel appears. If you don't automatically see this panel, it should be under Window and then Glyphs. And you'll be able to just make sure there's a tick next to that, and you'll be able to access that. And from here, you can actually select all of the emojis that you might want to use. So it should have the full catalog of all the emojis that have ever been created, if it's available within that font. Obviously, if you select a font that only supports certain emojis, then you'll only get those emojis. But here's just the standard smiley face, and I can just add that to my project. So yeah, if you want to get emojis in Photoshop, you do have to go through this process to create an emoji. You can't just copy and paste one in, unless you copy it in and then change the font of the thing you've copied in to one of the emoji fonts. So that's just quickly in case anyone's wondering about how to get emojis in Photoshop. Cool, so in order to bring up some more options for when we're actually editing our text, there's a few different ways we can do this. So if I have a text object selected, you'll notice that the panel on the right, the properties panel, is automatically going to change. So this is going to bring in a whole load of different things that we can change about our text, such as character, etc. However, if you'd like this panel to appear somewhere where it's a bit more easy to access, just go to Window and select Character. And as you'll notice, it'll now add it to our tools just on the right-hand side here. You can actually also just move this one anyway and just make it a separate window if you want to be able to edit slightly from a different location. So as you can see, we've got a lot of the basic things that we also had at the top. This is obviously a simplified version of this panel. So we can again change our font, we can change the font weight, and we can change the font size. We can also from here change the color, which we could also adjust at the top. And then the second option that we automatically also get is the paragraph option when we turn on this character from Window. So you can see we have the basic text alignment here again. Let me just quickly select this text so it's a bit more obvious. So we have center aligned, we have right aligned, and left aligned. You can also use these options in order to keep it and justify it a bit better, so it actually spans the entire box if you have created a box. If, like we said at the start, you didn't create a box and you just pressed once and created a heading, you probably won't get this option. I don't think you will. So that's something to be aware of. If you want to create things like indents, then you can do this here. You can just create an indent. This one is a left indent for your entire text body. This one's a right indent for your entire text body. And this one is just for the first line. So if you want just to add an indent to the first line, then you can do that like so. Perfect. And then at the bottom, we've also got if you want to add spaces before paragraphs or spaces after paragraphs. So for example, you could add a spacing just in front if you wanted to. I think I'd actually have to create a paragraph division like so. If you want to quickly select all your text, you can press Command and A or Control and A on your keyboard. And then you can adjust the spacing before and after paragraphs in your text body as well. Obviously, if you don't want to include hyphens, so for example, where it's hyphenating these words here, you can just uncheck that and it's going to keep all of the words complete. So that's basic paragraphs and text alignment, which you might use not as frequently as you'd actually expect, but yeah, they are the options there if you want them. So for the other character parameters that we have some important, the most important three I'd say are leading, and then we have kerning, and we also have tracking. And there's a distinctive feature between all of these, and it's quite important to know all of them because it can help balance your text and make it much more legible and easy to read. I'm just going to quickly reset this just so we can show you from the start. So leading is a bit of an odd spelling. It's actually spelled like leading, but it's called leading. It kind of rhymes with, for example, sledding or something. So if you see it, it's spelled like this, but it's actually said like leading. A bit of an odd one in the English language. And leading essentially is the difference between the line spacing for our text. So like any parameter, we can just hold and drag in order to increase or decrease this parameter. So if we had 0, all of the text would be on the same line. If we had any other number, we'd obviously be increasing the spacing between our lines. The easiest rule for this, again, a lot of this kind of comes down to your designs. Do you think it's appropriate for your design? What gives the best look for your design? It's all up to you, essentially. There's no hard, fast rules, but a general rule that you could follow is that line spacing is normally best between 120% and 200% of your font size. So for example, I have a font size of 60 for my text here. So in order to get a line spacing, the bare minimum would be 120% of 60, which I believe is 72. So if I set 72, this is the bare minimum for line spacing in order for it to feel good. The max you'd probably want to go is 200% of your font size. So in this case, that would be 60 times 2, which is 120. So 120 pixels. And as you can see, you generally don't want to go for a line spacing too much further. The reason for this being that it can be quite disjointed, and you don't want your reader having to be strained in order to actually view all of the text that you've written. However, the golden, it's not really a golden ratio, but the kind of sweet spot for the proportion between line spacing or leading and font size is probably about 140% roughly. So 140% of 60 is 84 pixels. So this is roughly a good ratio or a good proportion for your leading within text. And this is just through a load of studies which have probably said that people seem to be most comfortable around this range. Again, you can go either side of this, but if you want something that's kind of general, then this is probably about the right size. The issue with going with line spacing too small is that the line spacing actually becomes smaller than the gaps between words. And the issue with this is that readers might be more inclined to actually read from top to bottom because the word underneath the top word is actually closer than the word next to on the right of the word. So you might be more inclined to read downwards than actually read across, which is kind of interesting. I never knew that, but I thought that was a pretty cool little fact. So yeah, if you want line spacing that feels balanced, multiply your text size by about 140%, so 84, and that should feel about right. So that's leading. And if you ever heard of the baseline is essentially the bottom line of your text. So that's the number it's going from. So if I just quickly get a line, it would be around here. So it's taking that baseline and adding or subtracting 2. So if it's 0 pixels, all the text would be aligned at 0 pixels. And if you increase it, it's going to increase from this line, not from the top of the text. So that's essentially leading. Then we have two options, which are often kind of intermixed. A lot of people don't actually know the difference between kerning and tracking, but there is a big difference between the two. Kerning is essentially the spacing between specific characters, specific pairs of characters within your text. So for example, in this heading that we have here, the kerning could be between the E and the A, and it's actually the distance between those two characters. This is normally set by the people who create the fonts. So if you're someone who creates fonts, then you'll automatically choose what spacing or kerning that you think is best for your font. So the normal setting that it's set to is 0, which would sort of be a metric. So 0 is essentially the distance between all of those should be pretty accurate. It should be the same. You can set an optical one, which is kind of a more of a feel good kerning, which again lets the reader read it slightly better. So for example, you'll notice a big difference with this text. So if you just observe the kerning within this text at the moment, there's quite a lot of space between it, and it's currently set to metrics, but if I set it to optical, you'll see that it changes slightly. It's actually easier to read, in my opinion. So it's trying to align it for your optical vision in order for you to be able to read it slightly better. There are cases when you'd like to use metrics. There are cases when optical might be better. Obviously, if you're creating a logo or something, say this heading 1 was my logo, it's quite important to adjust the kerning. You'll notice in a lot of professional logos, if you read, for example, the Amazon logo with a much smaller kerning, it would look a lot different, and it would feel a lot different to the Amazon logo that we actually know. So it's quite important to get your kerning right, because it can imply all sorts of different things and mimic all sorts of responses from the people who appreciate your designs. The difference with kerning, and if I just quickly set this to metrics, and tracking actually uses all of your available text. So in this case, if I have all of this text selected, it's going to actually adjust the spacing between all of the letters relative to the entire body of text. So as you can see, it's just going to, sorry, that's the wrong one. That should be 100. It's going to actually reduce the spaces for all of them by the same value. So there might be times when you want to use this. In After Effects, this is something you can use quite a lot in order to actually create this kind of cool effect that looks something like this, which you see a lot in films. So you can actually apply tracking. But this is actually applied to all of the characters and between the first and last character within the text that you use. So those are two different ways to actually adjust the spacing within the characters, and it's quite important to use them in order to make your designs, feel better. But again, there's no hard fast rule. So for some people, you might prefer this in your design, or you might prefer that. There's not a golden correct way of doing this. But it's good to be aware that you can do it in order to be able to customize your text properly. Then the other options that we have within this menu, so after the tracking, we have the scale of our letters. So you can adjust the height, so the vertical scale of your text, in order to elongate it in a certain direction, or maybe reduce it in another one. The standard is 100%, that works in percentages. And the same horizontally, you can adjust the scale horizontally in order to stretch your text either direction, if that's something that you'd like to apply. Then at the bottom here, we also have some other features. So you have bold, so you can apply an extra bold to any of your fonts. So even though we've already got heavy selected, there is a bold version of that. You can italicate your text. If your text this is quite handy, if you want to change your text quickly from, say you've written this text and now you've realized that you wanted it to be in uppercase, this option here will automatically set it to uppercase for you. So there's no need to rewrite the entire body of text, and just by clicking it, it's automatically going to go back to whatever you had before. So that's just a nice quick way of being able to adjust that. The next option that we have is this option, which I have actually never used, but it's just a way of uppercasing all of your text, and the first head or the first character, which is normally uppercase, is going to be slightly larger than the lowercase, but they're all uppercase. I've never used this option, but it's there if you want to use it. The next two options are your superscript and your subscript options. So the first one, for example, if you had 2 meters squared and you want the 2 to be squared, then you can select this option. If you want it to be superscript, then this is the option. If you had something like H2O, then you can use subscript, which is this next one, in order to place it underneath and make it smaller, so that becomes apparent. If you need to adjust the height of this, that's also possible actually. So if you just select this one, and I think it's, where is that option? There is an option somewhere where you can change that. like I said, again, I don't really tend to use these ones too regularly. We should bump into it at some point. But there is an option where you can actually adjust that line height. Oh, it's here. Just in front of me. So you can actually manually place the height of that if you so want to. If you're not happy with it, it's automatically set to kind of the default, so that would be 0. Just like that. So that's superscript, subscript, and adjusting the line height for that if that's something that you need to do. And then we also have underline, and we also have strikethrough. Just like that. And these options are slightly more advanced for very specific cases, if you want fractions, not all those kind of things. But these are kind of the main ones that you need to be aware of if you do want to manipulate your text in any form like that. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of text in Photoshop. There are some other cool things that you can do. For example, if you have a path, you can actually place text on a path. By the way, I'll show you this one quickly. If you just delete this, and let's say this was our logo, H2O, something like that. If you want to be able to adjust and actually manipulate the texts and actually change the font yourself, there's a way you can quickly adjust this and change it into a shape or a path. So just by selecting the layer and going to the properties panel, at the bottom, you'll notice it says convert to shape. So just by selecting that, it's automatically going to change your text object into a shape object. And you can actually now, by selecting the pen tool, just by pressing P, or going to the paths, you can actually change and manipulate the individual path of each character. So you can actually change the way it looks and adjust your font this way. So if you want to be able to create a cool logo from a font that you really like, or you want to adjust the font in order to get something looking a bit cool, or you wanted to add an extra little element to a certain character, this is the easiest way to be able to manipulate the fonts. Obviously, one downside is that it does turn it into a shape layer, which means you can't actually go back and edit it later. So that is something to be aware of. But that is a feature there if you want to do that. Another quick thing that I'll show you, although we won't be using, I'll cover it probably in another video, is if you do have a path, such as, let's say, a curved path like this, if you didn't want to use that warp feature that we covered at the start, if we press T and go to the tool, you can actually apply a text directly onto your path just by selecting it like so. So for example, I could now add my title here. And all of the same character features would apply like any other text object that we have. We can adjust all of the different things just like so, and you can add it to your path just like that in order to create text, which maybe moves in different shapes. It also works for circles and any other thing. So if you want your text to go in a circle or something, that's a nice and quick way in order to add text to a path. So that's about the basics of all the text that you could ever want to create in Photoshop. I know it's quite specific, and hopefully there were a few things that you did like or that you think you can apply to your designs. The golden ratio is obviously a great one to be able to apply, and I apply it in pretty much every design that I can, just because it does work really well if you want to proportion your text in different ways. And obviously it's always important to know the difference between leading, kerning, and tracking, and all of those basic fundamentals that you might need to use. So that was the basics of text in Adobe Photoshop. Like I said at the start, do consider joining the newsletter if you think you'd be interested in that. I am going to be trying to get a weekly newsletter out every week, which is going to let you know about what you can expect in the next live stream, so you can get your questions prepped, maybe have a go at the content in advance, and see if you come up with any problems and things that we might be able to work through within the live stream. I'm also going to be live on my film class just after this, so do feel free to join me there. Like I said, we're going to be covering loop in, loop out, wiggle, time, and one other expression, which has currently slipped my mind, in just a moment. So we'll be live there at 2:30. So hopefully I might see you there. And other than that, I'll hopefully see you in the next live stream. So thanks very much for tuning in, and I'll see you then.